Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad you tuned in to Eagles Nest Church this morning. We're so excited to present today's services to you and spend the time with you. Hey, let me encourage you this morning as we get ready to start our worship set. Would you just take just a moment and decompress? Take a few kind of calming, deep breaths and just get ready to go before the throne. Did you know even in your living room or wherever you may be watching, you can still spend time with your Heavenly Father in true, engaged worship? So tune everything out and tune in as we get ready to worship together as our worship leader Paul gets ready to lead. Following that, our pastor is going to be leading us in the sermon series Rupture or Repair. He's got a very timely message that's going to talk about how we can continue to deal with conflict and conflict management. It's really going to fit, hopefully, right where you're living today. So get ready for that. It's going to be powerful. And then lastly, stay tuned at the end. We'll provide you with some announcements and some things going on around us here on this campus and provide you with any other updates that you may need, as well as a way you can contact us. So get ready, Eagles Nest. Here we go. Enjoy worship together. We're so glad you tuned in.
But is this love that won't relent? It's calling out with heaven's breath. Who's reaching wide to save our souls? Only you. It is this grace that makes no sense, that we could never recompense. Who gives us all a second chance? Only you, only you, only you. There is no one like our God. There is no one like our God. There is no other God who can save. There is no one like our God. Who hung the stars upon the night, showed the sun how bright to shine, who shaped the world within his hands. Only you. Oh, who set the sky upon the hills and told the waters to be still, who spoke to form the universe. Only you, only you, only you. There is no one like our God. There is no one like our God. There is no other God who can save. There is no one like our God. There is no one like our God. There is no other God who can save. There is no one like our God. No height or depth can stand between us. No power on earth or all creation. No life or death can separate us from your love. No height or depth can stand between us. No power on earth or all creation. No life or death can separate us from your love. There is no one like our God. There is no one like our God. There is no other God who can save. There is no one like our God. Oh, there is no one like our in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. Oh, you say I am loved, and I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong, and I think I am weak. You say I am held, and I am falling short. When I don't belong, you say I am yours, and I believe, oh I believe what you say of me. I believe the only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. In you I find my worth, in you I find my identity. Oh, you say I am loved, and I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong, and I think I am weak. You say I am held, and I am falling short. When I don't belong, you say I am yours, and I believe, oh I believe what you say of me, and I believe, taking all I have and now I'm laying it at your feet. You'll have every failure, God. You'll have every victory. Oh, you say I am loved, and I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong, and I think I am weak. You say I am held, and I am falling short. When I don't belong, you say I am yours. Oh, I believe what you say of me. Oh, I believe. Oh, I believe. Yes, I believe what you say of me. Oh, I believe.
Good morning, Eagles Nest. I hope that you've had a good week. Last week we shared that we don't know when we'll be reopening the facilities, but we do know how. We're going to start with a soft and a safe opening. By safe, we'll continue to practice social distancing even while we're in the building. And so what we're going to do is we'll be thoroughly cleaning the building. We'll be putting out hand sanitizer. We'll spread out the chairs so there'll be plenty of distance between people. And families will be able to move their seats so that they'll be able to stay together in a group, but there'll also be plenty of space between them and other people. We will not be passing the offering baskets. Instead, we'll put them by the door so that nobody has to touch them. And that's what we mean by safe. We'll be working on continuing to do things that make things safe. By soft, we mean we'll be operating and opening in a limited and smaller way. We'll continue to do our 9:30 online service for those who don't feel quite comfortable about coming out, or maybe it's not safe for them to come out. We'll have multiple services that are smaller and in accordance with the state guidelines, which we don't have yet, by the way. And we'll be limiting our time together, so our service will be about an hour like it's been online, so that we can limit the contact that we have with each other. And then we'll be limiting what ministries we open, so that we're making sure that we're opening them as it's safe to open the various aspects of ministry. Now, we've been in a series over the last few weeks dealing with the irritations that this being home together and all the new things that we have to do have been causing. In fact, I wish you could have been here this morning when we were filming our message this morning. We took about an hour just to work out all the kinks. We were putting things on boxes. We're moving lights. We're doing all kinds of stuff. You just wouldn't believe what we had to. All the irritations just to get so that we could do the filming. And this is the way we're living our lives. You know, we're having to do so many different things that we don't normally do. And what happens when that begins to be the normal way that we live is we get irritated. And we get irritated with the people that we love. And so we've been doing this series basically to help us to deal with this irritation. We call it rupture or repair, the art of conflict resolution. Now, I've gotten some feedback from some of you, and I'm already hearing how relevant this message and these messages have been. And so I want to encourage you not only to apply this message to when you're at home with your loved ones, but apply it at work. Apply these messages even with the coronavirus discussions that we're having ourselves. You know, we've got to be careful. People are beginning to divide and get polarized even on how we should handle this. And I want to encourage us as Eagles Nesters to be a bridge builder and not a divider. And one of the ways we do that is we have to learn the art of conflict resolution. We have to repair the ruptures in our relationships and our conversations when they take place. So far, we've seen that conflict is common to all of us, but it's curable. There is a cure for conflict. But we also saw that to cure our conflict, the first thing that we have to do is we have to get out of bird brain. We have to confront our own emotions and how we feel about things before we confront other people. Pastor Jay had a great application of this in his announcement section, which comes at the end of our messages. He said last week, he said, before you send that tweet or send that email, think twice and get out of bird brain. That was a great application of what we were trying to say last week. Because it's real easy to get wrapped up in the emotion of writing a tweet or an email or sending a message and not think through what we're feeling when we're writing it, and it might not convey exactly what we want it to convey once it gets received by the other person. So that's where we start. We have to recognize that our conflicts can be resolved, and to resolve them, the first thing we have to do is confront ourselves and level out our emotions and get in control of ourselves. Now, we also last week asked you to send testimonies in about how your life is being impacted and what you're doing to deal with the impact. One of the great testimonies that we have this week is that we've had a church member that has been struggling with the coronavirus for about 5 or 6 weeks. He was actually in the hospital for several weeks and on a ventilator for a couple weeks, and things were really serious for him. But this morning we have a testimony to share with you, and that is this, that Mark got to come home this week. He's doing well, he's improving, he's no longer infected with the virus, and things are getting much better. And we don't want to give you too much information on that because we want Mark at some point when he feels strong enough to be able to share his story with you. It is quite a journey that he's been on, and it will help us to see what people are going through that are having to deal with this virus, and it will also help us to understand there's hope for us when we get ill, but that it is a serious, serious problem. And it will begin to help us to be able to relate to all the different facets of discussion that are going on in our society today. And so if you have a testimony, please send it to us at hello@eaglesnest.ch. hello@eaglesnest.ch. Now, I want to continue this morning in our series, Rupture Repair, and I want to start with a little story that I read years ago that comes from Christianity Today. Christianity Today recognized that conflict is so common that they even put together what they called a spoof Bible. It's called the Confronter's Bible. And it says, "Take heed, timid Christian, the next time you're persuaded to confront a backslider but don't know where to begin. Help is available thanks to the new Confronter's Bible. You need no longer to hem and haw with cryptic references, subtle hints, or suggestive innuendos about the errors of his way. Like the Eschatology Bible shaded in premillennial purple, or the Social Justice Bible with all the references that produce guilt, accented in impressive orange, the Confronter's Bible contains a coordinated system highlighting verses of relevant themes. Rebuking is in passion pink. Sin to be avoided is in stop sign red. Straying off the straight and narrow is in off-white. In the event that the rebukee does not respond to your speaking the truth in love, try any of these suggested alternatives in confrontation. Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 25. Pull out his hair. Judges chapter 15:5. Set his fields on fire. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 24. Call out the she-bears. Oh, just to go back to the Old Testament and be a man of God again. Just to do things that way. When the earth swallows up your enemies and whales swallow up those that offend you. Oh, where are the whales? Where are the she-bears? Now, I just want you to know, this is really a spoof. It's not true. Don't do any of those things. But what it does illustrate is that conflict happens. You know, I didn't really know this when I began pastoring. I was a lot naive when I started pastoring. I thought, how hard could this be? I'm dealing with Christians. This is going to be a walk in the park. But after the founding pastor left in my first church, suddenly the flock was quite restless. Conflict abounded and Whitewater was ahead, but I had no clue what I was in for. But then I came across a tape by John Maxwell. Remember the tape days? This goes back a while, cassette tapes. But John Maxwell did a tape, a teaching on conflict. And it's not an overstatement for me to say that is one of the top 10 influential, impactful messages I've ever heard in my life. It really helped me at a very critical time in my walk with God, but more importantly, at this point, in pastoring the church. Because I didn't see conflict properly. And what this tape helped me to do was to see conflict in a more accurate way. Now, his message had 3 parts, but it was the first part of his message that really impacted me the most, because the other 2 parts of his message I really was familiar with at the time. But the first part concentrated on what he calls the 5 stages of conflict. I had never considered before that conflict actually unfolds in stages. And what I want to stress this morning as we look at these 5 stages is I want to stress something that's very important for us to understand, is that conflict does have stages, and that the stage that the conflict in reveals the remedy that we need to take to resolve it. And so the first thing we're going to do this morning is we're just going to look real quickly at the 5 stages that Maxwell identifies. The first is what he calls the remedy stage. Now, in the remedy stage, it's characterized by the attitude of fix the problem. It's like, Houston, we have a problem, and everybody wants to fix it. We begin to recognize that there's a problem. Everybody's kind of, high-fiving and knowing that they can resolve the problem. So there may be disagreement on how to resolve the problem, but there is a general optimism that the problem can be solved. There's a commitment to solve the problem. There's honest and open communication, hoping that the problem will be solved. And many times problems are solved right here. But if the conflict is not solved in the remedy stage, it moves to what Maxwell calls the repositioning stage. This is when we begin to ask, who caused the problem? And we begin to enter the blame game stage. The focus now shifts from solving the problem to protecting oneself. People begin to get nervous and they get anxious. They begin to generalize things. They start speaking in generalizations. They begin to operate, and we begin to operate on feelings versus fact. Our trust level for one another begins to lower. Mistrust begins to rise, and a questioning spirit begins to fill the air. Communication becomes cautious and not clear. If the conflict is not resolved at this stage, the conflict, by the way, you can move through these stages pretty quick too, as we'll see in just a moment. But if the conflict is not solved in this stage, we begin to move into the right stage. Now, the right stage is characterized by an attitude that says, I'm right, so you must be wrong. We begin to speak in moral tones. People begin to take sides. People begin to label one another. Now, let me just tell you from experience, once we begin to label, it's not usually good. When I've watched conflict over the years as a pastor and helped resolve conflict, once we begin to label, the labels are usually not very positive. They're very demeaning or devaluing. Like, we don't begin to call people genius, we call them an idiot. And if we do call them a genius, it's usually with sarcasm. And so we begin to label people at this stage. The focus shifts from solving the problem to winning. No longer is the solution really the focus. We don't want to fix the problem as much as we want to begin to fix other people. Communication becomes overstated and even distorted. And if the conflict is not resolved at this stage, it moves to the removal stage. This is get rid of those people stage. This is I want a divorce stage. People are no longer satisfied at this stage with getting their own way. Now they have to get rid of the opposition. The goal is divorce. People are now in camps. There's a clear leader if it's become a group thing. And all trust, whether it's an individual thing or whether it's a group thing, trust is gone. Now, if conflict is not resolved in this stage, it moves to the final stage, which Maxwell identifies as the revenge stage. Somebody must pay. People are no longer satisfied with a resignation. People become fanatics. The conflict becomes a God issue. Now it becomes immoral to resolve the conflict. And then the conflict begins to go out of bounds. Now, as I said earlier, we can go through these phases really quickly. But I want to encourage you as you enter a conflict, or if you're in a conflict, I want to encourage you to consider what stage it's in. Because when you see the stage you're in, what you need to do also becomes obvious. And so before we look at what we need to do in those stages, let's look at these 5 stages from a biblical frame of mind. As we see it in the scriptures, we're going to look at one of the most famous conflicts that's ever taken place in the Bible, and that's between Saul and David. Now, the Bible tells us that the first king of Israel was a man named Saul. Now, Saul wasn't a very good king. He didn't follow the Lord, and so after so many chances that God gave him to do things right, God decided that he was going to replace Saul with a young man named David. Now, this caused a conflict between them because Saul did not want to give up his throne. And so when you're a king and God says, I'm going to give your throne to somebody else, that's a real conflict. And this is one of the biggest conflicts we'll see in the Old Testament, along with Cain and Abel. You know, Cain and Abel had a conflict. Well, this is another big one. David and Saul have a conflict that's really going to last somewhere between 7 and 10, 12 years. I'm not quite sure. I've read different numbers on how long the conflict lasted, but it lasted a long time. And so we pick up the story of David and Saul's conflict in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 7 and 8. And what we see first is the remedy stage. In verse 7 and 8, David and Saul have a problem, and Saul says, Houston, we have a problem. He recognizes there's a problem. It says in verse 7, it says, so the women, David had just come back from some kind of campaign as a military leader, and now they're having a parade. And so the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Then Saul was very angry. Bird brain. We dealt with that last week. He's in bird brain. Okay, now what did we see last week? He needs to confront bird brain before he confronts David, something he never does. Now moving on. And the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? Now we could take this verse apart and spend about 30 minutes. There's so much in this verse about bird brain that we could literally do an hour, a half hour to hour sermon on that, but I don't want to do that. I want to move on. But here's what I want you to see. Kings don't like it when their generals get more praise than them. Saul admits, we have a problem. But Saul is unwilling to deal with the real problem, which in this case is Saul. And so the problem goes unresolved and it moves to the next stage. In verse 9, we see the conflict between Saul and David move to the reposition stage. Saul starts the blame game. In other words, now we've moved from Houston there is a problem to David is the problem. And it says in verse 9, so Saul eyed David from that day forward. Notice the mistrust. Notice now Saul's looking at David as a problem. How he's looking at David is even different. Now he's not considering the fact that he might be the problem. David is now the problem. Saul is afraid, he's anxious, there's a loss of trust, and now he's looking at him with suspicious eyes. And because the conflict was not resolved at this place, it moves to the next level. It moves to the next stage. And I want you to notice this is moving pretty quick. It didn't take years for it to get here. It probably took minutes. In verse 10, we see it move into the right stage. It now becomes for Saul a moral issue. How do I know that? It says in verse 10, it says, and it happened on the next day. So we see a day's going by and he's in phase 3. That the distressing spirit from God, and Saul, what happened is Saul would get depressed and David would play the harp to soothe Saul. And so that's what David was doing the next day. And it says, the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul. He was depressed. And he prophesied inside the house. Now let me say that again. And he prophesied in the house. So David played music with his hand, as at the other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand. Now that's a little indication that things are about to get worse. But a distressing spirit comes upon Saul. And what that's saying is that Saul got depressed. And once again, in Hebrew, they didn't have a lot of adjectives, so they would call something the spirit of, or describe it by having a spirit. So it's not necessarily an evil spirit is coming upon Saul as much as he's depressed. And he's depressed because he's in rebellion against God. He's not following God, and God's warned him many times to do what he wants him to do as king, and he doesn't do that. But I want you to notice that Saul prophesies. He speaks in a prophetic tone. He speaks in a moral tone. All prophecy has a moral tone to it. Now for Saul, it's a spiritual thing. It's a good versus evil thing. But notice, Saul is good and David is evil. Folks, I just want to take a few minutes here, or a few seconds, I should say, and just warn us here. Is one of the things that's happening in our culture today is there's a lot of moral prophesying. There's a lot of moral tones when we disagree on subjects. And I'm starting to hear this when it comes to the coronavirus. I can see us beginning to get in camps. I can see us beginning to have moral indignation towards people that are not, how should I say this? They're not handling the virus with the same attitude or actions that we think they should. I want to encourage us to be real careful here, because there's a lot of good people that are going to disagree with each other when it comes to how we handle this coronavirus. And we need to bring the moral tones and the argument down. And so Saul is no longer here in this story looking for a solution. He's moralizing about how wrong David is. And because it doesn't get resolved at that stage, it moves to the removal stage. Saul not only wants a divorce, Saul wants to kill David. He's moving even into the 5th stage. But let me read it in verse 11 through 13. It says, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. Now, let me just say right here that David is more of a man than I am. Because it would never be able to be said of Pastor Bob that I escaped Saul's presence twice. It would say Bob escaped his presence once. David had the spear thrown at him 2 times. The first time he goes back and starts playing the harp. This guy is brave. Now Saul, it says, was afraid of David. Think about this. Saul is an old man. Saul is a king. He's been a king for a number of years. David might be somewhere between 17 and 19 years of age. And Saul the king is afraid of David. I want you to notice how emotion is running through each one of these stages. And Saul never confronts his emotions. He never gets out of bird brain. And the emotions just run the conflict from one stage to another. It says Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Saul knew that the Lord wasn't with him, but Saul never repents. He never turns back to God, which is the real problem. Therefore, notice, Saul removed David from his presence. We're in the removal stage. And he made him captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. In other words, what Saul did is Saul made him a military leader, hoping that he'd get killed in battle. He's removing him from his presence. Things begin to escalate. He's gone from, just trying to fix David to killing David. And David escapes twice. It doesn't get resolved here. And so we see it move into the revenge stage. And in reality, the rest of 1 Samuel is about the revenge stage of Saul. Saul will chase David for 7 to 10 years, trying to kill him. And David will stay one step away from Saul. And at times it gets so close, his life is on a rager's edge. Because Saul is no longer satisfied with getting David away from him. He wants revenge. David has to pay. David has to be eliminated. Now, when we enter a conflict, it helps us to identify the stage so we can identify the appropriate remedy. In truth, folks, you and I will go through all of these stages at one point in our lives. Now, I've not met a human yet that doesn't fall into the trap of letting conflict escalate, including Pastor Bob. I go through it and I have to catch myself. I was in a counseling session this week with somebody, and I said, I just want you to know that I sometimes miss it in this area too, and I have to go back to the stage before it. I have to go back to confronting bird brain. Folks, we're going to make mistakes, and what I want you to see is looking at these stages is not a scorecard. It's not a test. It's to help us to see how and where we are in our conflict so we can see how we need to resolve it. It doesn't matter how long you're in the stage either. Some of us have gotten stuck in some of these stages, and I want you to know that even if you're stuck, you can do something to get unstuck. And so, let's look at these stages again. The remedy stage is the first. In this stage, we really want to resolve or solve the problem. And so the secret to the remedy stage is to find the real problem. It's what I'd like to call the Einstein's 1 hour rule. Einstein, one of the smartest men that ever lived, had a rule that he used to teach about problem solving. He said if you have 1 hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes on trying to figure out what the real problem is and 5 minutes on the solution. And I'd like to say that after 25 years of full-time ministry, that 80% of the time, if we do that, a lot of our problems would stop right there. Find out what the real problem is. That's the remedy stage. Focus on the problem. And when you find the problem, when you find the real problem, it's amazing how the solutions to those problems that cause the conflict really become obvious. This is not what happened with Saul and David. In the remedy stage, Saul came to the conclusion that David was the problem, and he never got to the real problem, which the scripture told us was that the Lord had departed from Saul, and the reason the Lord departed from Saul was that Saul departed from the Lord. Let me just speak to this, because some of this theology can really mess with our heads if we don't understand it in the context. God didn't leave Saul. Not originally. Saul left God. God doesn't just leave us. But when we say we want nothing to do with God, he'll respect us and say, if you don't want me around, I'll honor that. I remember when I was 15 and a half years old. When I was 15 and a half years old, I wanted to have fun. I wanted to do my own thing. And I knew I had a call of God on my life. The Holy Spirit was dealing with me and trying to direct where my life was to go. And I told God, I said, God, I want to do my own thing. Leave me alone. I literally did that. And you know what he did? He left me alone. And I began to experience the consequences of living life without God. And I'm just going to say, within a year, I was begging God to come back into my life. You don't want to live without God, and God doesn't want to live without us. And so that's just a little rabbit trail. I just want to encourage you so that we don't misunderstand these scriptures. All Saul had to do to solve this problem at this stage was to repent before God and say, God, I have sinned against you. I take responsibility for my sin. I ask for your forgiveness. And the remedy would have begun just there. But he doesn't do that because he doesn't want to deal with the real problem. And so the problem moved from the remedy stage of finding out the real problem to the reposition stage, which is when we start getting into camps. We stop operating out of let's fix the problem and figuring out what it is and get the facts to being led by emotion. So what we have to do in the reposition stage, when we're beginning to reposition ourselves, is we have to stop operating out of emotion and go back to stage or step one. When we get caught up in our emotions, okay, we get I like to call it, we get historical, not hysterical. Now, we can get hysterical. That's bird brain. But we also get historical. We start bringing up all kinds of things from the past, and our emotions begin to drive how we look at the problem instead of the facts. And so, like the old TV show used to say, and the Dragnet show used to say, just the facts, man, just the facts. Give me the facts. When we start to enter the reposition stage, we've got to begin to get back to the facts, not our feelings. That's why I said last week, we've got to deal with bird brain. We have to deal with bird brain in stage one, or we're going to start manipulating the facts. Now, in the right stage, if we don't solve it there, and we don't get back to the facts, and we don't get back to step one, or stage one, where we solve the problem, the real problem, we go to the right stage. Now, to deal with this stage is very simple. See how easy this is? The right stage is, I think I'm right, and you're wrong. We have to give up being right. We have to stop worrying about being right, and we have to give up our rights. We have to stop demanding our rights, and we have to stop thinking that we're right. Because what can happen in this stage is when we get to the right stage and we begin to separate it and I'm right and you're wrong, we can become afflicted with something called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when we begin to fit everything into our filter so that everything we see begins to confirm what we think or feel about a certain thing. And folks, it is rife in our culture. We are all afflicted with this at times, and we've got to beware of confirmation bias, that whatever we see confirms, okay, I said such and see, you did this, that confirms it. It does not necessarily confirm it. If it's being filtered through emotion, and we have to go back to stage one, we have to get out of our emotions, and we have to begin to look for the facts. In fact, confirmation bias is something psychologists deal with all the time. And they will say, Scott Peck says, it's one of the number one leading causes of emotional and mental illness. When we begin to look at things only through a confirmation lens, and we lose the capacity to find the real facts and what's really going on. And so I want to encourage us, if we get in that stage, we have to begin to look for the facts, not how we interpret the facts. That's stage 3. In stage 4, the removal stage, what we have to do is we have to reestablish safety between the opposing parties. We have to create a safe zone, and we have to reconnect with each other. We have to get back in the room, even if you need a third party. We have to begin to communicate again. And we have to do this in a very safe way. This is so important. This stage here, or this response to this stage, is so important. I'm going to do an entire message on this because this will really help you. Because I'm kind of going fast through this because my goal is not to overteach you today as much as to repeat these 5 stages 3 times at least, to get us to think about what stage of the conflict are we in so that we can begin to consider what remedy we need to apply. My goal here is not to give you everything you need to do in every stage. I'd have to spend another 2 or 3 hours to do that. And I know most of you are getting up late. Many of you are laying in bed watching this. And some of you are going to watch this at night. You know, I know how it's going. I know the temptation in the midst of all this. I have to admit, you know, I've gained 5 quarantine pounds since I started, and I'm on a diet. So I know what's going on, and I'm really trying to struggle with this stuff too. And so though I'm giving you a lot of information, my real goal is to give you hope and point you in a direction that when you get in conflict, if you figure out where you are in the stages, you can begin to look at what you need to do. It doesn't matter who we are. I mean, everybody has to do this. These 5 stages that are identified by John Maxwell, I can confirm with 25 years of full-time ministry experience. Okay? And so when we get to removal stage and we want to push people out of our lives, what we need to do is reestablish safety between us and the way we communicate, and we might need a third party or several people, a counselor, pastor, a small group leader, or somebody to do that. But we actually really need to reestablish connection with each other so we can go back to stage one, find out what really happened, what the real problem is, and begin to resolve it. Now, the fifth stage is the revenge stage. This is the stage where we want people to pay. Now, when we get to that stage, if our conflict gets there, we have to forgive. We have to give up the right to hurt back. We have to let the debt that they owe us go. That does not mean we reconcile, because the truth is, in order to reconcile, once we forgive, we have to go back to step one, stage one, the remedy stage, and we still have to confront the issue that caused the conflict in the first place, and it has to be resolved. If it's not, we can't reconcile. You know, this is one of the trickier things when we talk about conflict resolution. Forgiveness is the bridge between a conflict that takes place and the process of reconciliation. But forgiveness is not the end. That's why I mentioned last week that forgiveness is not forgetting, and I got a little pushback on that. And I want to continue to say it's not forgetting, because if we forget what's happened, we're not going to resolve it. Forgiveness is letting go of the right to hurt back. And it's changing the focus from the rupture in the relationship to the repair of the relationship. I doubt seriously serious things that happen to us can even be forgotten. But I know this, unless we deal with what the conflict is, it will be impossible to forget it, even if you want to. And so let me just clarify. Forgiveness is not forgetting, but it is moving the focus of the relationship away from what ruptured it. But it's also building a bridge so that we can address the things that need to be addressed so that we can reconcile and that it's safe to reconcile. Now, once again, I'm going to be explaining these things in more detail in the weeks ahead. But for this morning, our take-home is this. We can purchase the Confronter's Bible when we have conflict and start pulling people's hairs out. We can set their fields on fire, or we can call for the she-bears. We can resolve conflict like that. Or we can ask ourselves, which stage of conflict are we in? And what is it we really need to do? And no matter what stage of conflict you're in, it's not too late to resolve it. If you're in the fifth stage, you can resolve it. Even in revenge stage, when you've wanted somebody to pay, or if you've made somebody pay, it can still be resolved. But there's things we're going to have to do. The work of forgiveness is not as simple and easy as we would like it to be. Just forgive and forget. I've heard that so many times from people when people have hurt one another. And I say, we're going to forgive it. We're going to help this person forgive it. But we've got to deal with it. Because often when that's said like that, people are just trying to excuse themselves and being irresponsible. And so to fix a conflict, to remedy it, we are going to have to deal with the problem. Now, we don't always have to deal with it, and we'll cover that in a few weeks. It depends on the nature of the problem. So just stay with me for today. What stage of your conflict is it in? Is it in the remedy stage where we're really working on the problem, trying to find out what the real problem is? Are we in the repositioning stage that we're beginning to get emotional and we're getting the facts wrong, we're leaving the facts behind, we're beginning to get caught up in our emotions? Is it in the right stage? I'm right, you're wrong. Are we beginning to have confirmation bias? Are we in the removal stage where we're so ticked off with each other, there's no trust, that we've just separated from each other and don't want to be together again? Or are we in the revenge stage where we want to make the other person pay? Folks, whatever stage that your conflicts are in, they can be resolved. Now, sometimes you need help. Sometimes we can't do this on our own. So I want to encourage you, if you need help resolving a conflict, or folks, if you're in need right now because of the situation we're in with the corona crisis, and you need help, please contact us at hello@eaglesnest.ch. I've been doing some online counseling with people, and others have been doing the same thing. So there's a way to get the need met if you need help. There are counselors available. We work with a counseling agency as well. And so if you need help resolving conflict, it's available. All you have to do is email us at hello@eaglesnest.ch. That's hello@eaglesnest.ch. Or call us at 302-684-3149. There is a cure for conflict. We can repair the relationships that get ruptured. We simply have to get out of bird brain. We have to begin to diagnose what stage we're in and know what medicine, what remedy we need to apply so that it can be resolved. Now, next week, we're going to be celebrating Mother's Day, and we're going to learn that moms know best, that when it comes to conflict, they know best about a lot of things, but they know as well as we do that when it comes to conflict, image is everything. And we're going to take a look at it next week. Father, I pray for the people under the sound of my voice. I pray for your blessing upon them as they struggle with this new reality. I pray for your grace and your wisdom and your provision in their lives. Father, help us to stay connected to you and to one another. Help us to apply the things we're learning. Father, we thank you for the wisdom that you give us through your word and the help that you give through the Holy Spirit and the salvation you provide through your Son, Jesus Christ. Bless your people, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. I look forward to seeing you next week. God bless.
Presence of the living God, it satisfies the depths of my heart, and all of me changed when you came, and I'm made free by your glory and grace. I breathe you in, God, 'cause you are there all around me. I breathe you in, God, 'cause you are there all around me. The brightness of love's pure light, it pierces through the darkest of nights, and everything is possible now. For God is here, and God is good. I breathe you in, God, 'cause you are there all around me. I breathe you in, God, 'cause you are there all around me. For you are good, God. For you are good to me. For you are good, God. For you are good to me. When I don't understand, I will choose you. understand, I will choose you. When I don't understand, I will choose to love you, God. When I don't understand, oh, I will choose you. When I don't understand, I will choose you, God. When I don't understand, I will choose to love you, God. Hey, yeah, for you are good, God. For you are good to me. Oh, you are good. For you are good to me. When I don't understand, I will choose you. When I don't understand, I will choose you. When I don't understand, I will choose to trust who you are. When I don't understand, I will choose you. When I don't understand, I will choose you. When I don't understand, I will choose to trust who you are.
Hey, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We're so glad you did. I want to encourage every single one of you listening to send some feedback to us. We've received some, but I'd like to hear from many more of you. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, if you send us an email, they'll put it up on the screen in just a moment. We will mail you a free gift just for tuning in. But keep the testimonies coming in. I want to hear what have you appreciated the most during this crisis period, and maybe what you struggled with. And then also let us know if we're able to share that information publicly or if you want to remain anonymously. But send those in. And let me also echo our senior pastor's comments to Mark. Man, we have been praying for you and your family every single day. We're so glad to hear the news that you're back home. Welcome home. Let me give everybody an update from our church. Our church has come through in a big way, so thank you to all of you. Our April budget continued to meet exactly all the expectations that we needed it to, even in spite of our church not having a physical meeting in this building. Absolutely amazing, so thank you to all of you. I've had a lot of questions on how to give and what's the most efficient way to do so. So let me share that with you as well. If you're part of the Eagles Nest Core family and you want to give your tithes or offerings to this ministry, you can simply send in a check through the mail the old-fashioned way. Take a look at the physical address here on the screen, and you can continue to mail in your checks. They're so appreciated. And for those of you that may not know, or those that are already doing it, or those that want to know how to do it, we encourage you also to use our online giving platforms. Here's how you can give to Eagles Nest Ministries online. First, you just go to our website, which you've obviously probably figured out if you're here already. Go to the right and click on the Giving tab. It'll say Give right at the top. Click on that, and as you scroll down, you'll see a couple different ways you can give through our Push Pay program as well as through Realm Giving. Click on those, and it'll walk you through a very simple, easy way, safe way to be able to give online to Eagles Nest Ministries, and we thank you in advance for doing that. And listen, Pastor Bob continues to give us timely messages hitting us right where we're at. How about the 5 stages of conflict? What really resonated to me was the different stages. You can actually look at somebody either online or someone you know, and you can go, man, they're in stage 1. They're just trying to figure this thing out and give us a remedy to fix the problem. Or maybe they're jumping all the way to stage 4 and they're in the removal phase and they're saying, hey, if you don't agree with me, I'm going to get rid of you, and censor everybody and shut them up. I don't know, but it was very helpful to have those stages. So keep those in mind as we continue to move through this crisis, and maybe that'll help you as you're trying to figure people out and how to engage them in a safe and appropriate way. Can I be honest with you? Differing opinions should still be okay. We don't always have to agree with one another, and I feel like we've lost the art of having healthy, respectable debate. Let's try and balance all of our responses with one another with respectful grace and the added healthy dose of truth that we need to balance it out. I feel like if we do those things, you know what? We could just do 3 things that Pastor Bob's already taught us. Let's have respect, responsibility, and be relevant with the people around us. And those 3 things will go a long way. Thank you for all you do, Eagles Nest. Continue to worship, connect, and serve together. And we'll talk to you next week. Take care.